Today's daf is daf tes, and we're going to start with Omerle Abaye L'Rova, where we left off yesterday on the top line. B'mayu kimtalahi. How did you interpret the brisa? B'gofan shalahem. In other words, the ksav was in that language. And the question is, my area, if that be the case, why did the Tana mention mikra sheksavo targum, targum sheksavo mikra? In other words, he made a double shinui. He changed the lashon and he changed the ksav. Zafilu mikra. He could have just mentioned mikra alone, even if he didn't change the lashon, the mikra, sheksavo mikra, and targum sheksavo targum nami. The din would be the same. That if he changed the ksav, it would not qualify and have the status of a sefer, with all its sanctity and its metamias yadayim, including the xera. Doktani, because in the brisa it says later on that a sefer is not metami b'yadayim ad sheich tevenu ashuris al ha-sefer ubidyo. So therefore you certainly need ashuris. And now you're telling me that he changed the ksav. That's called the gofan shalahem. Shalahem means that language, but not ashuris. So that automatically would lower and downgrade the status of the sefer, and it would not be mitami yadayim. So why does the brisa have to say that it was mikra ksavu targum ksavu mikra? Leave all that out. It's unnecessary. And because of this question, this objection of Abai, the Gemara now offers a new reconciliation of the stira. Ella lo kasha. There's no stira between the Mishnah and the brisa. Why is that? Because each one reflects a different sheet in Tanoim. Our Mishnah. Rabbana reflects the sheet of Rabbana. They hold Sfarim Nichtavim B'chol Lashon. And but the Brisa represents the shita of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who disagrees with the Chacham in our Mishnah, and he's of the opinion that Af B'Sfarim Lo Yitiru Chiyichtru El Yavanis. The only other language that was permitted in terms of the Sefer Torah was Yavanis. Any other language is completely possible. That's why the Brisa mentions Mikra Sheksavo Targum, meaning in Aramis, and it's not Metabi Yadayim. So the Gemara asks the kasha, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, if the Brisa is to be attributed to the view of Rabbi Shimon, then why are you saying that it's only Mutter Vashuris, Ika Yavanis? There's another option, according to the Shita of Shimon, namely, he could write it in Yavanis. Says the Gemara Lo Kasha, we're going to have to come up with a different option, an alternative reconciliation of the Brisa and the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is talking about Bisfarim. Sfarim means Sifrei Torah or Nevi'im or Ksuvim. They can be written B'chol Lashon. And the Brisa, which requires exclusively Ashuris, nothing else will do, that's B'tfilin u'be mezuzos. And the Gemara is going to now derive the halacha in Tefillin and mezuzos that only Ashuris is kosher. Bil mezuz my taima, mishum dechsiv behu, in the parish of Kriyat Shema, in Dvarim Perik Vav, and the word Vahayu means Behavayasam you, in the same exact situation as it was Mitchila at the very beginning. That's how it should remain. And we should write it only, exclusively in Ashuris. That's the way it was given at Har Sinai. The Gemara rejects this answer as well. Why is that? If the Bryce is talking about Tefillah Mezuzahs, why does it say Targum Sheksavo Mikra? That I understand, there is such a thing as Targum Sheksavo Mikra. How? Bishlema, not in the case of Tefillah and Mezuzahs, but rather in the case of Sefer Torah. There are cases where the Torah was meant to be written, a few words of the Torah in Aramis, that's called Targum, and instead he wrote it B'Lashon Kodesh. For example, Yigar Sahadusa. In the 31st parak in Gracious, that's a Lashon Aramis, Yigar Sahadusa. But Hacha here, if you're talking about a Bryce and Tefillah and Mezuzahs, my Targum Ika, which word is written in Aramis in this parsha that Instead he wrote it in Lashon Kodesh. It must be it's proof they're positive that the Brisa cannot be addressing the case of tefillin u'mezuzos. There would be no heichatimtza of Targum that was written in Lashon Kodesh. So we're going to have to assume that this Brisa is not talking about tefillin and mezuzos, but rather about Sifrei Torah and Nevi'im Ksubim. Elo Kashis. Now we come to an alternative reconciliation. There's no steer between the Mishnah and the Brisa. Why? Each one is addressing a different scenario, a different inyan. And the Brisa is talking about Megilla, Megillus Esther, and it's not Matamis Yadayim unless it was written in Ashuris. But our Mishnah is talking about Sfarim, Sifrei Torah, Nevi'im Ksubim. They can be written in any language. So the Gemara immediately asks Megillah, my timer. How do you derive the conclusion that Megillus Esther can only be written in Ashuris, whereas other Sfarim that make up Tanakh be written in any language? And the Gemara answers the Chsiv Ba, with regard to Megillah, the 8th parak of Esther, it says Kik Savam V'chil Shonam. In other words, you have to write it in the Ksav Ashuris, Lashon Kodesh. That's the way it was written originally. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute, my Taimum Sheksava Mikra Ika, where do you find in Megillus Esther a Lashon Aramis that he wrote in a Lashon of Mikra, Lashon Kodesh? And therefore the Brisa says that if he made a change and he wrote Targum in Lashon Kodesh, the Megillah is downgraded, it loses its status as Kisvei HaKodesh, and it's not Matamis Yadayim, Rav Papa, yeah. And the Gemara offers two answers. According to Rav Papa, where do we find Lashon Targum? It says, V'nishma Pisgam HaMelech. The word Pisgam is Aramis. And it was written in Lashon Kodesh, and that's why we downgrade the Megillah. Now, the word Pisgam in Aramis, Ibn Ezra says, means davar. So it means V'nishma davar amel, dvar amel. Where do we find Lashon Aramis in the Megillah? The next part of that same pasuk, it says, V'chol hanashim Yitnu Yikar Lebalehen. What is the word Yikar? Yikar is in Arameus. And that means kavod in Lashon Kodesh. So instead of writing Yikar, he wrote kavod. And now we have a discussion here. Does the word Yikar is actually in Aramaic? It says, Barosas Osher Kod Malchusaves Yikar Tiferes Gedulasa. Earlier in the beginning, at the very beginning, it also used the word Yikar. And apparently the word Yikar has two different meanings. Number one, when it's written with a shva, Yikar, as under the yud is a shva, then it means covered. And that's where the Gemara thinks it's possibly Targum. It's Aramaic. But if the word Yakar, meaning the yud has a comma, same three letters but a different vocalization, then it means chashivus. And that for sure is Lashon Kodesh. Rav Ashi Omar, Rav Ashi offers a teretz which we had earlier, one of Harab Shimon Gamliel, but now he patches up the question that we had on it. Our Mishnah reflects Shita Chachamim that are matir, writing Sfarim in any language. The Brisa reflects the Shita of Shimon Gamliel. He was only matir in Ashuris and Yavanis. He Tanya Ahi. And the Brisa says, Tavenu Ashuris. Why doesn't it mention Yavanis if it's authored by Rav Shimon Gamliel? And the answer is because the Brisa is not talking about Sifrei Torah, but rather B'shar Sfarim, which means Nevi'im Uksuvim. And this Brisa reflects the Shita of Yehudi, who claims that the heter of Rav Shimon Gamliel to write Yavanis only applies to Sefer Torah. It does not apply to Nevi'im Uksuvim. That has to be written either in Lashon Kodesh, has to be written in Lashon Kodesh, and in Iksav Ashuris. And where do we find the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda in interpreting Rav Shimon? This Sanya we learned in the Brisa, Filin umezuzas ein nichtavim ela ashur. According to the Tanakhama, this Brisa Tefillin and mezuzahs can only be written exclusively in Ashuris. Rabbi Steiner, Rabbi Shem Gamliel, Hitiru, Yevanis. Now, the Gemara at this point sort of takes a little bit of an interruption in the words of the Brisa, and just asks a kasha: how is it possible that Shem Gamliel would be matter writing tefillin and mezuzah in Yevanis? Well, the Torah says Vahayu. This was a drush that we had earlier today. That Vahayu means Vavayasam you, and we cannot change the ksav and the lashon from the way it was given originally. So therefore, the Gemara now refurbishes this brisa in a slightly different text. Ela ema, we should read the brisa as Sfarim Nichtovim B'chol Lashon. Rabbi Seinu Hitiru Yevanis. So we're not referring to tefillin u'mezuzahs, but rather we're referring to Sifrei Torah. And Sifrei Torah, according to Chacham, can be written in any language, but according to Reb Shem Gamliel, they can only be written in Ashuris or alternatively Yevanis. Now the Gemara goes back and asks the following question. Since the Brisa mentions Rabbi Seinu Hitiru Yevanis, Michlal, we infer the conclusion that Tanakama Osa. The Tanakama would not allow you to write Sfarim in Yevanis, which is impossible. The Chacham Amati writing Sfarim in all Lashon, B'chol Lashon. Ela Ema, Gemara answers that let's assume the Brisa is Rabbi Seinu Lo Hitiru Sheyichtaru Hasfarim B'shar Lashonos Chutz Milashon Kodesh, other languages other than Lashon Kodesh, Ela Yevanis. It can only be written in Yevanis. Now let's see the next part of the Brisa where Rabbi Yehuda steps up. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda, even though according to Shem Gamliel, we were matir writing Sfarim Yevanis Lo Hitiru Ela B'Sefer Torah. It was only a head of Sefer Torah, but it does not include Nevi'im Uksuvim. And what it means is that there was a valid translation of the Sefer Torah, of the 5 books of Moses, into another language. And that's why they were matir the 5 books of Moses in Yevanis. And all this is based on the original Targum, we call it Septuagint, from the number 70, where the Talmud Melech gathered together 70 Chacham to translate the Torah into Greek. But as far as Sifrei Nevi'im Uksuvim is concerned, we don't have this heter, according to Reb Shem Gamliel, to write Sifrei Nevi'im Uksuvim in any other language other than Ashuris. That's the Shita of Yehuda, that Reb Shem Gamliel was not matir writing Yevanis except for Sifrei Torah. And therefore, Rav Ashi interprets the Brisa that requires Ashuris as referring to Nevi'im Uksuvim. Tzanya Ma'aseh b'Talmud HaMelech shekines shivim u'shnayim zkenim v'chnisa b'shivim u'shnayim batim. He put each chacham, each zaken, into a different room. V'lo giu lehem al ma'atinsa, and he didn't give them a warning up front what the purpose of his gathering together the chachamim was. So they couldn't be Mataki say, so they couldn't work it out together that they should synchronize their answers. And Talmai goes into each room, the Amalem, and he says to them in the same language, Kisvuli Torahs Moshe Rabchem, write the Torah of your Rebbe in Yevanis. And a great miracle took place. In Nosan HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Lev Kol Echad V'Echad Eitzah. Eskimu Kulam L'das Achas V'Kosvulo. They all wrote the Targum with 14 changes. And this was because HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about a great nest that miraculously each one of the Skanim operating independently would come up with the same reinterpretation in the translation on 14 changes. Number 1, that implies that there's some entity of being called Gracious that created God, or created the sun and the moon and the celestial spheres. And that is what's called Shtei Reshuyos. In English, it's called Gnosticism. I don't think you pronounce the G. And there was a very common belief at that time in two gods. Therefore, instead of Bereshis Bara Elokim, they all, each one of the 72 Zkanim translated as Elokim, Bara Bereshis. Second change. Vayom Elokim Nase Adam B'Tzalmenu Kidmuseinu. Once again, it sounds like Shtei Reshuyos. God is conferring with another being to decide about creating man. And instead, they translate it as E'ese Adam B'Tzelem Elokim. The pasuk says Nasa Adam in the plural. They translate it as Ese, I will create. So it's not to believe in two Reshuyos. The third change is Vayechal Elokim Bayom HaShvim L'Ato Asher Asa. He's supposed to be Yom HaShvim L'Ato Asher Asa. And it sounds like Vayechal Elokim Bayom HaShvim that God worked on the seventh day until he finally was Shabbos. So they translate it differently. Vayechal Bayom Hashishi, right? There's no pasuk Vayechal Bayom Hashishi. Vayishpos Bayom Hashvi. So Vayechal means God terminated his malacha on Friday, and then he rested on the seventh day. Change number 4 with regard to the creation of man. It says Zachar Nekeva Bra'am in the plural, and they translate it as Zachar Nekeva Bra'o in Lashon Yachid. They didn't write Bra'am or translate Baram into Lashon Rabban, which it is. And the reason for that is to avoid an apparent contradiction in the Psukim, because later on it seems that God created man alone, Adam alone. He had 2 partsufim, but he was created alone. And here the pasuk says Bra'am, as if to say God created both male and female together. So if they translate it as Bra'o in singular. Number 5. This is the Dara Flug. And the pasuk says, Hava Nerdov in Novla Shams Fasam Asher Lo Yishmu Ish Sfas Re'eru. And they translated into Lashon Yachar Yahava Erda instead of translating as Nerda in the plural, as if they're 2 Reshuyos, but rather Lashon Yachid Hava Nerda, not Hava Nerda, but Hava Erda. I will go down in the singular. Number 6. The pasuk says, "Vatitzchak Sarah b'kerba leimar." God gets angry at Sarah because she laughs after the Besora of having a child. They translate it as Vatitzchak Sarah bikroveha. She laughed, so to speak, bikroveha. What does it mean, bikroveha? Don't think that Sarah laughed in front of other people publicly, and that's why she was censured by Hashem, because then you'll have a kasha. Yitzchak also, it says, Vayipol al panav Yitzchak, Vayomer b'libo al ben mea shana yivoleh. Why would Hashem get angry at Sarah and not at Yitzchak? They both responded with tzchok. But by adding the word bikrovel, which doesn't say in the pasuk, that translation indicates that Sarah laughed in front of other people, bikrovel. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was makpid on it. But Avram, he had a tzchok in his lave, in his heart, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not makpid. So those are the first 6 out of 14 changes. Now number 7. Here, Yaakov Avinu is giving harsh rebuke to Shimon and Levi. We read this just 3 days ago. And it says, Ki ba'apam hargu ish. They translate it as Ki ba'apam hargu shar. Because it would sound like Rotzchim hayu avoseinu. That Yaakov himself testifies that they killed an Ish, if you read it and translate it literally. They wrote instead Shah, meaning that the Anshe Shem were considered as Shah. Again, we're not lying over here. The Pasuk is explicit that Shimon and Levi wiped out Anshe Shem, but Anshe Shem are considered in the eyes of Yaakov as Behemos. And if that be the case, then the Apam Hargu Shah. Number 8, with regard to Moshe Rabbeinu when he comes back from Midian to Mitzrayim, it says, "Vayikach Moshe es ishto bespanav, vayakivem al chamor." Now, a gamal is a much more sophisticated animal going through the desert, so forth, so on, and it's a lot more prestige. A chamor is for the poor people. It's a cheapo animal, a donkey. So that would indicate that Moshe Rabbeinu was poor. He's that leader of a gigantic community, and he's poor. I mean, that would look like a bush of a cherpa. So therefore, they translated it as "Vayakivem al nosei bnei adam," on an animal which carries people, which in that time was generally speaking a chama, a gamal, or maybe a sus. So that's why it says nosei bnei adam. So those animals that carry men, but not a chamor, because that would indicate that Moshe Rabbeinu was down and poor. Another change, this is number 9, with regard to Yetzias Mitzrayim, it says that Moshe Bnei Yisrael shayosh Mitzrayim shloshim shana v'arba'ah me'el shana. So they added Moshe Bnei Yisrael shayoshvu b'Mitzrayim u'b'shar arotzos arba me'el shana, because in fact Bnei Yisrael were not in Mitzrayim in a state of Avdus for more than 210 years, and yet this passage speaks about 400 years. So by adding U b'shar arotzos, we reconcile and we answer that question. Number 10. At the end of Parshas Mishpatim, Vayishlach es na'arei b'nei Yisrael. Wow, this is Kabbalah's b'nei Shechin, and we're sending na'arei b'nei Yisrael. The word na'arei, the lower, the younger people represent the lower echelon. And they, the Chacham, translated as Vayishlach es zatuse, that zatute b'nei Yisrael. So we're trying to avoid the Talmud and the Goyim saying, Chusim shebachem shalachtem lekabel p'nei hashkin. Because nare is priestess. But zutati is a lashon chashivus gedol. Now, once they changed it to a word that indicates chashivus, then they wrote, instead of ve'el atzile b'nei Yisrael lo shalach yado, ve'el zatute b'nei Yisrael lo shalach yado. So that there'll be a perfect synchronization of the two words.